This week, avowed socialists traveled to Cuba and partied in the streets to show their support for the Cuban communist regime, while back home in the Western world, we suffered several tragedies as a result of the policies they support. My name is Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. So, our first story of the day is related to Cuba. Naturally, Trump has, in the past few weeks, talked about potentially wanting to interact with the Cubans and take it over, essentially. Hopefully without military force, but that's been in the news. And in particular, they've been having issues over the past few months, I would say, with their electorate, with their power, because the U.S. has sanctioned a lot of the nations that provide them power. Russia has overwhelmingly abandoned them while they're fighting in Ukraine. Iran is currently engaged with the U.S. in a conflict in the Middle East. So there's not really much oil that's actually getting in there. So they've been suffering a ton of blackouts. And the socialists decided that they were going to go there and stand for the communist regime that is allowing this to happen by working with other socialist countries that are against the U.S. on the world stage. So not necessarily the best, but let's look at this article from the New York Post. So one of the key figures here was Hassan Piker. He's a big leftist streamer, an avowed socialist, and he traveled there with Code Pink. They, as well as the daughter of Representative Ilhan Omar. And while they were there, they had the leftist Irish hip hop group Kneecap show up, and all of them were celebrating. While at the same time, the actual natives of Cuba were suffering the third blackout this month. And what's even crazier about this is that the people who were celebrating were staying in five-star hotels. So they aren't really socialists. They say that they are. It's like one of my buddies was telling me the other week. They're called NIMBYs, not in my backyard. They support the socialist policies, but they don't actually want to have those policies implemented on themselves because they think that they're better than you, which that's not how these policies work. And this is why they're bad, because they should be applied universally, and the people who want them don't want them applied universally. They want them applied to the people who aren't themselves. But what's even funnier about this is that Hassan Piker actually released a video explaining that he was required to stay in a five-star hotel during his time in Cuba. So I'll play that clip now.
I was saying, tourism is the lifeline for the Cuban economy as it stands currently. The government has very limited resources, and the American government makes it illegal for Americans to stay wherever they want when they're in Cuba. They have to stay in what they've declared as five-star hotels, right? I'm telling you all this because, like, even the five-star hotels are not like, it's not like, it's what the American government has declared five-star hotels. But regardless, in comparison to the situation on the island, it's prosperity pretty much. And experiencing that dichotomy has like definitely fucked me up. Definitely.
So as you saw there, he said that the U.S. government actually requires people from the U.S. to stay in five-star hotels when they're going to Cuba, which this actually isn't true. So I have the policy pulled up right here. So this is Title 31, Subtitle B, Chapter 5, Part 515 of U.S. Code, Restrictions on Lodging, Paying for Lodging, or Making Reservations at Certain Properties in Cuba. Except as otherwise authorized pursuant to this part, no person subject to U.S. jurisdiction may lodge, pay for lodging, or otherwise make any reservation for or on behalf of a third party to lodge at any property in Cuba that the Secretary of State has identified as a property that is owned or controlled by the Cuban government, a prohibited official of the government of Cuba, as defined in U.S. Code 515.337, a prohibited member of the Cuban Communist Party, as defined in U.S. Code 515.338, a close relative, as defined in 515 as USC 515.339, of a prohibited official of the government of Cuba, or a close relative of a prohibited member of the Cuban Communist Party. Such properties are identified on the State Department's Cuba prohibited accommodations list. This prohibition does not apply to certain transactions set forth in paragraph B of this section. So that's actually not true. He wasn't required to stay in a 5-star hotel. If anything, it's more likely that he is not supposed to stay in a 5-star hotel, as a lot of these 5-star hotels are actually owned by the communist government there, and that's how they get the 5-star rating, because the Communist Party decides that since they're owned by the Communist Party, they should be 5 stars, and that way they encourage people to go there, and they're making money off of it, which doesn't sound very communist, but that's how a lot of these communists work. They restrict capitalism to everybody else except for themselves. So that's why they become so wealthy. The elite class basically takes control of all the finances while everybody else is just poor in the country. They can't get anything. It's just awful. This is one of the many reasons why I'm against socialism, because it has never worked. It will never work. It only works in fantasy land, and I live in the real world, not fantasy land. So obviously that happened. We also had Meta and Google found liable for a lawsuit this week over social media harm to kids. This is from Reuters. Google, Los Angeles, March 25th. Alphabet's Google and Meta were found liable on Wednesday for designing platforms that are dangerous for kids and teens, in a landmark verdict that could force tech firms to rethink how they defend themselves against safety claims. The verdict could mark a turning point in the global backlash against their platform's perceived mental health harms to youth, more than 2 decades after the emergence of social media. So this is a mixed bag. Personally, I agree with this decision. I think that the algorithms are awful. They are addicting, and it causes a lot of problems. So I think that was really great decision by the judge there. But there are some concerns by people who publish content on these platforms. For example, if me, like I do YouTube videos, I do a couple of posts on X, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm mostly active on X, but a little bit on Instagram and Facebook as well. But what this essentially allows is, or what it essentially forces, is these companies to they're liable for the content that they feed people, which means that the algorithm that they use to actually give content to people is questionable and can be problematic. So they may be required in the future, as a result of their legal departments, to remove these algorithms, which I think is generally a good thing, because at least for me, if I'm on social media, I only want to see the content of people that I follow. I don't really want to see a whole bunch of random stuff. I also don't like that they track your information, so that's pretty much where I stand on it. But one thing that this does hurt is, like I said, if you're a small creator, it's a lot harder to be discovered because you have to have people directly follow you or share your content, which, if without the algorithm, there's very little chance that that's going to happen. And to get into other issues, this would essentially bring back the era of broadcasting networks, where the only way that you would become reputable is to join one of these broadcast networks, and it eliminates all the benefits that come from independent media. So one thing that I think that they may do, like I said earlier, the legal departments may require them to remove the algorithm entirely. I'm kind of hoping that what they do is, instead of removing it, they have it as an opt-in feature. So what that means is that you join the platform, and by default, you just get fed the content that you actually subscribe to or you follow. And that if you want to see new content, you can enable the algorithm, and it'll go through your information as well and provide you new recommendations. And to me, this is the best of both worlds, because this returns freedom to the individual as opposed to the corporation just automatically enabling the algorithm and forcing you into those various content that you may or may not want to see. And if you do want to see that content, you can go in and enable it. As long as it's easy to opt in, then I'm perfectly fine with it. I think that may be the way that it goes. Like I said, I kind of hope that it is, but we'll see. Obviously, this just happened this week, so it's going to be a bit before we start seeing the fallout of this, but hopefully soon. But obviously one of the big issues with this is mental health. And this week we actually had an absolutely horrific tragedy in Spain where we had Noelia Castillo Ramos. She was euthanized this week as a result of, I don't recall the exact name of the policy in Spain. She's from Spain. But it's essentially what the Canadians call medical assistance in dying, where if you want to die, you are allowed to have a doctor kill you, which I've been vehemently against this. It's an absolutely horrific policy. There's no reason that we should be allowing institutions to kill people legally. There's literally no difference between that and murder. I know some of my leftist friends will tell me that it's all about consent, and there are certain things that you shouldn't be able to consent to, because if you allow for the idea that you can consent for somebody to kill you and that makes the killing justified, then what was wrong with the Nazi experiments? Because if those people consented, then there would be nothing wrong with it. And that we can all agree that they were absolutely, the Nazi experiments, the Japanese experiments, they were all horrific and they should not have happened. And no level of consent should allow for those things to happen. So that's why I've been extremely against this. But in this instance, this woman, this was actually a government-caused problem, because she's 25 years old now. This happened in 2022 is when this whole process started. She had depression, and so the state decided to put her in a state home where they could provide her mental health and actually help her. While she was here, she was gang raped by several North African migrants into Spain, because they have pretty much open borders in the EU right now. Like I was talking about last week, they have a significant number of North African and Middle Eastern migrants coming into the country. So a leftist policy that they then took them into this home and they gang raped her. So she was already dealing with depression, and then this happened while she was under state supervision. And then instead of solving the problem, because that's what you would expect the government to do, they encouraged her to kill herself, or have doctors kill her, to be more accurate. And if you actually look here, I'll put up the clip now.
Noelia Castillo Ramos, tengo 25 años y bueno, me quedan 4 días. Básicamente porque el 26 ya me hacen la eutanasia.
¿Has dudado alguna vez de, venga, paro todo el proceso?
No, lo tenía muy claro desde el principio.
Es sobrecogedor. Es sobrecogedor el testimonio de Noelia. Hoy concede a este programa su única y última entrevista después de que el Tribunal de Estrasburgo avale su eutanasia, su decisión de morir. Enseguida con Bea Osa, que es en quien ella confía para conceder esta entrevista, vamos a escuchar un avance de la conversación en la que Noelia explica por primera vez y antes de morir su decisión.
So not only did she get gang raped, and the government not do anything, they didn't arrest the people who actually raped her. She tried to kill herself back then. She jumped off a building 5 stories tall, and she survived. She's a paraplegic now, or she was. And so that happened. She tried killing herself. And like I said, instead of trying to give her the help she deserved and she needed, the state encouraged her to kill herself. And this isn't the way that we should be having policy at all. And I know a lot of leftists support it, but that's just absolutely horrific and wrong. So we had this happen, and if you actually look into, I'll put up a few other snapshots of various articles now, but her father was the one fighting it legal, like they were fighting the legal process to stop this, because in Spain, the only way that you're actually allowed to get this medical assistance in dying is if you have a sound mind and you decide that you want to die. And the argument was that she was depressed, so she couldn't have been in a good state of mind to actually represent herself and say that, yes, she actually wanted it. So, like I said, the state continued to push that on her. She said yes. The first court said that they were not going to stop the proceeding. And then there was actually a second court that this week, I believe it was Saturday, they said that they were going to allow the euthanasia to go forward, but that they were going to investigate the process after the euthanasia. So these people wanted her dead. And that's literally like state-sponsored murder. Like, any way you spin it, that's what it is. So these people are absolutely horrific. And anybody who supports this policy is an absolutely evil person. But, I mean, like I said, in this instance, she's 25 years old. She has a whole life ahead of her. And they would rather have her killed than actually give her the help and support she needs. And these are the same people who say that they're compassionate, that they want people to be happy. But this clearly illustrates that they don't. They want people to suffer. And when they feel like their suffering is too much, they want them to kill themselves because they're no longer a burden to the society. That's evil. There's no getting around that. But the craziest part of this to me is not just that the government would allow this to go forward and conduct an investigation after she was dead, which that if they had stopped it, it could have saved her life. But not only did they do that, but there's actually reporting as well that she had second thoughts about going through with the medical assistance and dying. And the doctors actually told her that they were going to do it anyways because her organs had already been given to other patients. They were already called for. So not only could she not reasonably make this decision on her own, but the doctors then forced her to continue, even if she had second thoughts on it, because they thought that her organs should belong with somebody else who actually deserved to live. Like I said, this is just evil. Any person who supports this is, like I said, it's just evil. There's no way, no better word for me to come up with than evil for people who genuinely support the idea that people should be able to be euthanized, especially when it comes to instances like this where where the government is pushing it on her, forcing it upon her, and there was no reason that this needed to happen. But this is how many leftist policies work, because this week we also had another murder as a result of illegal migrants. This was in Loyola University. It was Sheridan Gorman. She was 18, and yeah, she was out for a walk on her campus with her friends, when all of a sudden an illegal immigrant came out and he shot her, like out of nowhere, no provocation, nothing. She was walking in the street with her friends and she was shot and killed. 18 years old, just doing something that any normal person would do, and an illegal immigrant killed her. These are the stories that the socialists and the leftists don't want you to hear. They always say that these are one-offs, but this isn't the first time this has happened. We've actually seen this a ton. And not only that, but in this instance, this guy had actually been apprehended and released prior. It was apprehended in May 2023, and then after he was apprehended, was arrested for shoplifting in Chicago and was released again. So this is what happens when you have open borders and soft on crime policies. You can't have a functioning society where you don't punish the criminals in your society. And this is especially exacerbated by the fact that we have millions of people who came into our country without proper vetting. They literally just crossed the border. They were given a court date and then released with no way of finding them. And this is the consequences. But like I said, we have seen this over and over again. Right here, Rachel Morin. She was a mother of 5. And yeah, she was out on a hike, I believe. And yeah, Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez, he was 23-year-old, suspected of being a gangbanger, illegal immigrant into the country. And he jumped her while she was hiking, raped her, and then murdered her. Where's the outrage for Rachel Morin? Her 5 kids are now having to live without a mother. Her husband has to live without his wife anymore, knowing that this was a easily preventable crime. If we had just enforced the laws already on the books and deported illegals, this wouldn't have happened. This is just absolutely insane that people actually stand up and support this stuff. We also see that, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. We also had Jocelyn Nungaray. She was 12 years old. She was another one where she was raped and murdered while she was walking. So yeah, she was basically just walking around. She went missing, and then they found her dead in a creek. And the man that they got for her crime was, and like I said, an illegal. It was actually 2 illegals who did this. And yeah, they were held on a $10 million bond, which is, like I said, insane. They should be immediately deported from the country. We know that they're illegal. That's a crime, whether you like it or not. It is. It's depending on if it's their first time. If it's their first time, it's a misdemeanor. It's still a crime. They should be deported, go back to their home country, and they should never be allowed back in the country for something this horrific. 12-year-old girl, and they raped and killed her. Then we also had Laken Riley. She went for a morning jog. She was jumped while she was jogging. Again, raped and murdered. She was, let's see how old she was. I believe she was college age. But yeah, she's going for a run inner city, and an illegal immigrant jumps her, rapes her, and murders her. How many times do we need to see the same story happen over and over again before the absolutely insane leftists recognize that their policies are hurting significantly more people than they're helping? Because, I mean, like I said, this guy was also previously arrested. He was detained by New York Police Department on September 14th, 2023, charged with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17, and he was released before the ICE agency was allowed to issue a detainer request, which, because New York City is a sanctuary city, they won't keep the illegal until they receive a detainer. And even if they do receive a detainer, there's only a certain time frame in which they will actually keep the illegal alien. So they're actively promoting these policies. And I'll even play a supercut of Kamala Harris. Thanks to Maze Moore for this, because he has a lot of good clips. But yeah, this is a supercut of Kamala Harris supporting these policies.
And Harris asserted that ICE is perceived as the modern-day Ku Klux Klan. Since when are carrying out the duties of law enforcement akin to acting like a Klansman?
You have Senators Gillibrand, Warren, and Harris calling for the abolition of ICE.
Senator Kamala Harris from California, who also was calling for abolishing ICE.
I asked her whether it's time to abolish ICE, and she said we might need to start from scratch.
From the official White House Twitter account, attacks on Senators Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren because of their opposition to ICE.
Kirsten Gillibrand, who's supposed to be smarter, says abolish ICE. Kamala Harris comes out that says, and the lemmings start following down the line.
The actions of Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, who recently warned the city's residents about an impending ICE raid. He basically said, how dare you do that? Do you think those actions that the mayor took were appropriate?
I support their ability and their capability to make those decisions. I'm not going to second guess it. I think that these folks are really mired in rolling back the clock in time, and that's not going to happen. California represents the future, and they don't like it, but there you go.
So that just shows that if Kamala were elected to be president, which thankfully she wasn't, but if she were, we would have had significantly more of this. More innocent Americans being murdered and potentially raped, because obviously that's seems to be the calling card of these people, by illegal immigrants. Like, it's just insane. There's no rational way to support this. At least if you stand for the American people, or if you stand for the innocent even, there is no logical way to support this. But we all know that that's not why they support this. They support this because these people will vote for them. That's why they do it. And I know that there's actually some Republicans, it's become increasingly less popular now, but there are some Republicans who actually support this illegal immigration because they allow for cheap labor in the country. But there is no reason, whether it's humanitarian side, financial side, crime side, there is no reason to allow these people into our country, let alone, or even less, to keep them in our country. We should deport them all. Like I said, it's a crime to cross the border illegally. Whether it's a misdemeanor or not, doesn't really matter. You need to go back to your house, like your home country. Like I said, it's not even just these illegal immigration policies. It's also the soft on crime policies. Because we also had last year Irina Zarutska. She was murdered, a Ukrainian refugee, which is supposed to be one of the big causes of leftism. They were supposed to be all pro-Ukraine. She was a Ukrainian refugee. She got on a bus and was murdered by a man who had been released previously. So he had 14 prior criminal arrests, and he wasn't kept in jail, wasn't given the death penalty. No, he was let back out on the streets. This is what people actually think is beneficial to society. And like, there is no way to say that this is beneficial. You can say all day long that you wish that these people would be reformed and be able to participate in society. But the reality is that's not how people work. If you have career criminals like this, 14 prior arrests, it's pretty easy to assume he's going to do it again. And if he had been properly handled, whether that be life imprisonment, actually kept in jail for the entirety of his term instead of getting out on parole, or even the death penalty, any of those would have stopped this from happening. But leftists don't care that this happens because it benefits them. They want the chaos in the streets so that way they can say that the Republicans who currently are in power are failing because there's chaos. But what they don't want you to know is that this chaos is caused by them. They caused the problem, and then when they get in power and there's no chaos, they claim to be the solution. But that's not how this works. They created the problem. They should be held accountable for it. It's just insane that all this stuff is happening. But luckily, we did actually have a win. It shouldn't particularly be a win this week, but the Olympics announced this week that they are going to be preventing all men from participating in women's sports, which, like I said, very common sense policy. I can't believe it took them this long to actually implement that, but that's what's happening. So I'll put up the policies just so you can see it. They're going to be issuing tests for all female athletes. So it's actually all athletes, I believe, but you're going to test in that, and if you are competing in a female sport and you fail that test, then you will not be allowed to compete in the female events. You're required to compete in any mixed gender or mixed sex, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. I know a lot of people say it isn't. It is. But they're allowed to compete in mixed gender events, or they're allowed to compete in the male gender events. And it's up to them. They can decide which ones they want to participate in, but they cannot compete with women, which is great. Like I said, I put up a post about it. This is absolutely common sense policy. It shouldn't have been a policy in the first place, but we've let radical gender ideology enter into so many of our institutions and various events that this needs to be celebrated, because the people who support these policies, they don't care about women. They say that they do, but tell me what's so feminist about a man beating up a woman, or a man entering a woman's space claiming he's transgender when he's just a pervert? Like, that these are the logical consequences of these policies. And they either, one, don't think about it that way, or they legitimately don't care. And I tend to believe that some of them, because a lot of leftists and liberals just don't know much about what's going on or how policies work in the real world. Obviously, you saw from my millionaire tax video a few weeks ago, it's common sense that these policies don't work, yet they are still supported by leftists, because a lot of them don't necessarily know what's going on or know what the policy entails. And once you actually apply a little bit of critical thinking to it, you recognize that it's a bad policy. And this is another one of those where it's like, yeah, we shouldn't be allowing men to compete in women's sports. If women want to compete in men's sports, I don't think they should be doing that. But it's better that women compete in men's sports than men compete in women's sports, because then women actually can win in their own category, as opposed to being dominated by men who pretend to be women. But obviously, with that win, that kind of underscores that Trump's policies are at least gaining some traction in certain areas. But we do have, I know I talked about it last week, but we have some more polling that came out this week that indicates that Trump may be having some issues with the polls. So I'll play the clip now.
Trump and Republicans won in 2024 because of support from male voters. The only way they can win, given the gender gap in this country, is support from male voters. And male voters are abandoning Donald Trump. Take a look here. This gives the game away. Okay, Trump's standing with men. In November of 2024, he beat Kamala Harris among them by 13 points. Look at where he is now on his net approval rating. Down he goes. It's a 20-point shift away from Donald Trump. He is now 7 points underwater at this particular point among men. I think it is very difficult for Republicans to do well in this midterm cycle if Donald Trump is underwater with men. As my uncle once wrote, where the boys are, where the men are, they are underwater when it comes to Donald Trump.
Okay, so that's overall men, but what about young men who were really influential?
Yes, young men. Of course, there was a massive shift to Donald Trump from 2020 to 2024 among young men. And look right here. Whoa! Yikes, 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 yikes. Men under the age of 25 on Trump. He won him in 2024 by 5 points. Look where he is now. The net approval rating way down there. Down we go to negative 19 points. That's nearly, what is that? Nearly a 25-point switcheroo against the President of the United States when it comes to men under the age of 45. Those men that had switched their allegiances over to the Republican Party are seeing what the President is doing. They don't like what the President is doing, and they have very much soured on the President of the United States, men under the age of 45.
What is it?
So as you saw in that clip by Harry Enton, and this is a leftist outlet, so take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's going to be more negative on Trump, but the trend is being replicated across the board, where men are becoming disinterested in generally in politics, but also in the Trump campaign. Because you saw here, in 2024, Trump was plus 14 or plus 13 with all men, and now he's at -7. And with young men, so under 45, he was plus 5, and now he's minus 19. So those are huge swings. And because young men in particular were the ones that really helped him win this past election, it could be problematic for the Republicans. I know I said this last week, but nobody can really tell you right now whether or not Trump, like the Republicans are going to win, or if the Democrats are going to win in the midterms, because we just don't have enough information. I actually heard a good quote the other day. I forget who it was by. It was on Timcast. It was the Tuesday night episode, I believe, because I was listening to it on my flight here. Obviously, I'm at CPAC, if you haven't seen that. But she said that polls are for strippers and firemen. And that's pretty much my feeling. Polls don't really tell you anything. What matters is election day. But we can learn some things from these polls and see that it is important that Trump starts focusing on younger Americans. And I believe that there are two primary factors for this. The first is that Trump isn't really running against anybody because the Democrat Party doesn't have a face right now. It's really just the Democrats. It's the boogeyman. And when you don't have a single person to direct any policy attacks at, it becomes difficult to incentivize people to run with your policies because, like I said, it's you as the individual Trump versus the elusive Democrat Party, which, like I said, there's no one person. We have, obviously, Kamala Harris. We have Joe Biden's out of it, but we have Gavin Newsom. We have Pete Buttigieg, J.B. Pritzker. We have a bunch of people, but there's no singular face of the party to actually run against. And that's what I think is causing a lot of problems. But the other issue is that men have become more disillusioned with politics because there's not really much that they feel is going on. And in particular, they voted for the Republicans this past election, 2024. And while Trump is doing things, and you can see it, he's actually done quite a bit. I know a lot of people say he hasn't. We closed the border. We got the One Big Beautiful Bill passed. We have record levels of crime being eliminated. So we have seen a lot of good policies. The problem is that the American people elected Republicans to actually do stuff, and congressional Republicans aren't really doing anything. The biggest piece of legislation that they've passed is the One Big Beautiful Bill. Right now, we're still going through another shutdown that's being caused by Democrats because they won't fund DHS, and this is causing problems for TSA and Coast Guard. But there's that going on, so there's no real funding benefit to Republicans, and we can't even get the SAVE Act passed, which is extraordinarily popular amongst the American people. I believe it's like 70% for voter ID across the board. So they elected Republicans to do something, and the Republicans aren't using that power. And to me, this is why there's so many people, especially men, saying that they're just not going to get involved with politics anymore because it doesn't matter who they vote for. And there's some figures who are also promoting this idea, which I don't understand why they would do it. I talked about this last week, that Republicans may not be the answer to your problems, but Democrats are almost certainly the cause of them. And like I said, I already went through today a ton of the policies that they have and how they're hurting American people. But when you don't see the opposite side doing anything, they're just kind of maintaining the status quo, it makes sense that you don't want to vote for them again. And Republicans really need to understand that, especially the Senate. Like, I cannot believe that we are struggling to pass the SAVE Act. There's extremely popular. Democrats won't vote for it because their claim is that it alienates voters. It doesn't. Like I said, I already read the bill. You can read it yourself. I put it up on one of my videos. You can read the bill. There is literally nothing in it that prohibits anything other than illegal aliens from voting, because it requires you to show voter. So you have to show a photo ID when you register to vote. You need to register to vote in person, and it requires states to clean up their voter rolls, which the less clean the voter rolls are, the harder it is to actually identify fraud, because you could have somebody who's dead on the voter rolls, and if somebody shows up to vote for them, they're still going to be allowed to vote. Even if the person, like I said, the person's dead, they can't vote. So they should be off the voter rolls, but they're not. So their name is still allowed to be entered into the vote, which would constitute as a fraudulent vote. So this needs to get passed. I'm sick and tired of John Thune just saying he's going to try to pass it, but he doesn't have the votes. We have the votes. The Democrats have previously said over and over again that they're going to eliminate the filibuster, but we won't do that. We won't even enforce the talking filibuster, which is what the filibuster is actually supposed to be. You're supposed to talk and debate policy, but they won't even do that. So I understand why a lot of people are being alienated by politics right now, but we really need to start winning, because if the Republicans don't win in November, if we don't even maintain the status quo and Democrats earn a majority, it's going to be the end of all of Trump's presidency. They're just going to issue impeachments, prosecutions against any conservative, because that's what they did under Biden. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do the same thing if they take power again, and we just can't let that happen. That's not the way that American politics is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be that if you win, you start prosecuting your opponent, but this is how Democrats have been operating. And unfortunately, they're projecting that onto Republicans. And like I said last week, I think a lot of the lawsuits that we're going after, even though there are actual crimes, we're going after the easy crimes, like the small ones, and it just seems petty, which I understand why people see it that way, but it's not what it is. We should get back to the politics where if you win, you accept the defeat, which Democrats haven't done at least since 2000, especially this, like, I'll probably get into that at some other show, but Democrats haven't accepted an election that they haven't won since 2000 with Al Gore. So it's just ridiculous. And another bad thing for Trump is that even in Palm Beach, where Mar-a-Lago is, a Democrat just won that seat. This is one of the most red counties in the country. It was a special election, and the Democrat candidate won. Luckily, it's only for a few months, because obviously there's going to be the full election in November. But it's crazy that a Democrat was able to win in Palm Beach. And like I said last week, I think that this is much to do with Republicans not showing up at the polls and an abundance of independents feeling like Trump either betrayed them or isn't doing everything he promised. And that's something that we need to fix. But hopefully we do have some good news soon, because we have a potential end to the Iran conflict. Obviously, this has been going back and forth for the past week or so, as Trump keeps on saying that he's having negotiations with the Iranians. Iranians keep on denying it. They keep on saying that they aren't going to support any of the policies he puts forward. So it's kind of hard to tell where things actually stand right now. I know that, I believe it was yesterday, Trump postponed his strikes that he had planned by 24 hours, or 48 hours, I'm sorry. So that may indicate that we're in talks, but we'll see. Like I said, hopefully this ends relatively soon, because I'm starting to get to the point where I'm kind of tired of talking about it, and I would much prefer it to be over. But we'll see how this goes. So in the alleged plan that Trump proposed to the Iranian leaders was 15 points. We don't have all 15. We only have 14 of the 15 that we know for sure, or is alleged to be certain. So first is that Iran must dismantle its existing nuclear capabilities, which that's great. I mean, we can't allow them to have a nuclear weapon. I completely agree with that, because we don't know how they're going to use it. They may use it to threaten us. They may actually use it. Who knows? Because they're pretty crazy over there. But that's step one. Point two is Iran must commit never to pursue nuclear weapons. Like I said, this is for safety and just to ensure that we aren't being basically held at gunpoint by them to get oil out. Even though us in America, we don't use much oil from there, but it does impact the global oil markets, which therefore causes shifts in pricing in American oil. So there's that. Step three, there will be no uranium enrichment in Iranian territory. Again, this is to prevent the development of nuclear weapons. Point four, Iran must hand its stockpile of some 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% to the Integrated Atomic Energy Agency in the near future in a timetable to be agreed. Obviously, this makes sense. 60% can easily be enriched to weapons grade fairly quickly. So it makes sense to have that delivered to the UN organization so that way it can actually be properly managed and we don't have them suddenly developing a nuclear weapon and using it on somebody, or like I said, threatening to use it. Step 5, the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo nuclear facilities must be dismantled. Again, preventing them from developing nuclear weapons. The IAEA, so the International Atomic Energy Agency, must be granted full access, transparency, and oversight inside Iran. Obviously, this makes sense because we want to ensure that they're actually following policies outlined here. Iran must abandon its regional proxy paradigm. So this means that Iran can no longer support Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, all those terrorist organizations across the region, which I highly doubt that they would actually follow that, but that's something that we should be supporting, that they stop using that to gain a foothold in the region. We also, point 8, Iran must cease the funding, direction, and arming of its regional proxies. Obviously, this just continues off point 7. Point 9, the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and function as a free maritime corridor. So this would be huge for world trade because that's where I believe it's 20% of the world's oil comes from. So if that strait isn't free, then it causes significant problems, and the Iranians can literally shut it down whenever they want by just putting mines there, putting ships there. Obviously, they don't have any ships right now, but there's plenty of options available to them that could stop the flow of oil to other places. And we can't allow them to have that power. So that would be great if it's a free maritime corridor. Point 10, Iran's missile program must be limited in both range and quantity, with specific thresholds to be determined at a later stage. Again, this is a defense issue because we don't want them projecting power throughout the region further than they already have, because if they do that, then it could cause problems for global trade or destabilize the region further, which it's the Middle East. It's always been destabilized, at least in recent history. So there's not much we can do, but this would limit destabilization in the region. We have point 12, any future use of, point 11, any future use of missiles would be restricted to self-defense. Again, this is a protective measure. Point 12, Iran would receive a full lifting of sanctions imposed by the international community. So this would be huge because that would drastically expand the amount of oil available to countries around the globe by removing the sanctions, because now that means that they're able to freely trade with other nations, and that would obviously increase global supply. Therefore, costs would go down because demand would probably stay similar to what it is. It may go up a little bit, but with the higher supply, prices go down. So that would be great. And I think that kind of betrays what a lot of this was about, because obviously oil is traded right now globally using the US dollar. That's why we call it the petrodollar occasionally. And the better, the more oil that's available on the market, the better our currency is backed on. And I really think we should get off that. But because that's the way things are, that's one of the reasons why I believe Trump pursued this conflict in the first place, because it would allow us to basically increase Americans' purchasing power relatively quickly. So I think it's potentially going to be a win for the midterms, but it's only going to be a win if it actually happens soon, not like in the next. If it would happen, if this went through at the latest, I would say probably July, because I believe that early voting starts opening like July, August. That's when people we're going to want to see those lower prices. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm really hoping that this war is only another week or two. But like, I can't predict what's going to happen. I can't tell the future. So we'll see what's going on. So there was that. That's point 12. Point 13, the U.S. would assist Iran in advancing its civilian nuclear program, including electricity generation at the Bushehr nuclear plant. This is huge because that's the purported reason why the Iranians want nuclear material. They want it to develop their civilian nuclear programs, which obviously that's not the case, because if that were true, they would support this because they would admit that they don't need to enrich the uranium themselves. They can just take other people's uranium. But they don't want that. They want it for nuclear weapons. So That's great. And then point 14, sanctions will be reimposed if Iran fails to comply with the terms. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of consequence if Iran were to violate this agreement, so that makes sense. And so that's the 15-point proposal, or the 14 of the 15 points that we know that was given to the Iranians earlier this week. And the Iranians purportedly rejected it. They basically came out and said Iranian state TV quoted an anonymous official as saying Tehran had rejected the plan it had received via Pakistan, saying it would end the war when it decides to do so and when its own conditions are met, and until then would continue fighting across the region. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, however you pronounce that, later said the proposals had been passed on to the country's senior authorities, but Iran had no intention of negotiating for now. So Iran doesn't want to follow through with this. Obviously, they think that it's too strict on them, which I genuinely think it's a bit too lenient. But I think it's pretty fair to them, and they rejected that. Purportedly, they proposed another 5-point plan themselves. I don't know what the plan is. I haven't seen it anywhere. The only point that I have read about is that they would basically retain control of the Strait of Hormuz, which isn't good policy if we want to support Americans, the oil industry as a whole across the globe, because we want cheap oil, obviously, if we want more people using the US dollar. But that's about it for this week. Obviously, like I said, I'm at CPAC right now. I've been enjoying the past few days here. It's been nice hearing from some big speakers, meeting some new people. Today, there's actually quite a few people that I'm excited to be listening to, because I know Michael Knowles is here. Hopefully I get to catch him, because the past few conferences I've been to, I haven't had the chance to meet him, and he's by far one of my favorite content creators right now, so I would love to meet him. And that's about it. So hope that you like what I said today. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. Feel free to follow me on any of the social media platforms. So thank you, and I'll see you next week.